Hey everybody. I wanted to share with you the process of what I am personally about to go through. And I've done this before. I'm going to do it again. And that is just the story of resilience. Sometimes we have to do hard things, and sometimes we are put in seasons that challenge us on every turn. So this idea of what I've showed previously in these other videos, I have what I call my upper room, and that is basically a room that I want to, repurpose and get back to doing the things of building my business that were disrupted from me having all these various challenges. And the second room that I want to redo, to just give it a fresher look, is this room. And I'm showing you again with where I am right now, and then so you can see the before and after of how the space changes. So this white cabinet behind me that is mirrored, you can see that it has a lot of clutter, and there's a lot of different books on the shelves, and that's not the way it's going to be. I've been in a process of sorting things and grouping things, and it's just what you're seeing is in process. So I have two goals. One is to take my upper room and get that in order, to take my business to the next level and move that room, which is currently just like a storage locker, into a functional, coaching space and that sort of thing. This room here is my living room, and also the place where I record videos, where I create content. And this is more of my private space where my private ideas are generated. And this is a space that I just want to, again, tighten up, because basically what I was doing was I'd take a box from the upper room, I'd bring it down here, I'd sort it down here, figure out what the things were in that box, and then I'd have all these various, boxes and things sorted, but then they wouldn't make their way back upstairs to the, upper room. So I've been kind of dragging the things back and forth, and I'm going to be designating these two areas in a new way to make my life more calm. Because as you can see behind me, it looks kind of cluttered, and I'm in the phase to get back to minimalism and get back to having things in order. So I wanted to talk to you about the idea that our society, the way that we are programmed is we're programmed to go out and get a storage locker and to spend $150 a month or more. And that's usually for like a 10 by 20 unit, something like that. For 12 months, and that's $1,800 a year that we are paying to store our stuff. Most of that stuff that's in a storage locker is not really organized. It's just kind of thrown in there. Maybe it was put in there in the midst of chaos or under tight deadlines. And then we just keep paying that monthly fee over and over again. And finally we're like, wow, like that's just so much. And then the things that we were trying to sell, maybe they're still in the storage locker. Maybe the things that we inherited are still in the storage locker. They're not physically in our home, but we're paying for all these storage fees that essentially we could be spending that money and putting that money to better use. We could be investing that amount of money a month, that amount of money a year. So what I did was I had a bunch of this stuff in storage lockers originally, and they were for different purposes. So I had I had a storage locker that had all of the materials, supplies that were for my van build. So there were so many things that needed to be purchased, and it was getting chaotic. So I got a storage locker, and I put all the things for the van build in the storage locker. And then because I was also in the process of purchasing a home and buying things for that home, so then I had a storage locker where when I bought things at discount or through consignment or whatever, then I put all the furniture and all those things into a storage locker that was for that new home. So essentially, I was using storage lockers to manage the projects that I was managing. And with the income that was coming in from my business and from my fiance's business, you know, we just kind of managed it. But I didn't really think about it, meaning you just kind of do it. And, you know, it's kind of a pain. You have to drive to the storage lockers. Depending on what floor your stuff is in, you have to deal with the carts and the elevators. And, you know, it's like, we did it, but it was definitely a drain. And also, you know, financially it was a drain, because we had 2 different storage lockers for those purposes, and then he had a different storage locker for his stuff in a different location. So essentially we were managing multiple storage lockers for different purposes, and you know, we just didn't think anything of the money that we were spending, because we had enough money coming in. So then, you know, life happens. So how did I get here into this space of accumulating all this clutter? The clutter that I showed you in my upper room, the clutter in this space here in my studio. How did I get there? The clutter that I, you know, trek back and forth within my van. How do we accumulate all this clutter? How did I get here? And I think for many of us, it's certain circumstances or life events that just take precedence over our life. And one of these problems, or one of these, you know, life circumstances, it may be you know, a lot for one person, but when you have a lot of them stacked up on top of one another, and within a short period of time, it's easy for anybody to fall behind. It's easy for anybody to just be so overwhelmed with, you know, the things that are going on, that you're like, wow, you know. So in my experience, what happened to me is that first I experienced the death of my aunt, and I inherited a bunch of her stuff. And so my empty exercise fitness studio became filled with all of the stuff that I inherited from her death. And even though it was a great thing that I inherited some of these things, and they were valuable, and some of them had meaning, and some of it was just stuff that I had to then resell, which took me 2 years to eliminate all of the stuff that I inherited from that particular death. And the process of not being able to use my space for my business purposes then required me to then rent out other space, because I didn't have the space within my home again. And so what I'm saying is, sometimes we just react to the circumstances, and we don't really put together that maybe there's a better way to do this. Then I experienced, after that grief, I experienced the death of my fiance. So with all those storage lockers that we were managing, and all the projects that we were managing, you know, purchasing a house, furnishing a house, you know, building a van build, dealing with his music studio, dealing with my coaching practice, and then he died. And again, in the beginning, it's like, what are you going to do with all this stuff? And first I had to like really evaluate and manage what I could manage. And so when I thought about it again, I had emptied that large space in my home from my previous aunt's death, and then that was a functional, you know, space for me and my fiance. But then when he died and I had all these storage lockers, you know, I was like, you know what? I know that it's not really what I want to do, but I'm going to eliminate all these costs of 3 different storage lockers, and I'm going to move all that stuff back into my home, into this room, and I will deal with it over time, and that way I'm not paying for all these storage locker expenses. So again, was it the best course of my money, of my time? I don't know. I'm just telling you what I did. And so I then went through all of those things from the storage lockers, and I was sorting them and reboxing them into clearly labeled, sorted them into clearly labeled boxes. So for example, if I had van build electric, there was a box that said van electric. And if it was plumbing, it said van plumbing. And if it was, things that I wanted to sell that were from my fiance that, I knew that I didn't want, then I put those into boxes and bags that were labeled sell and giveaway, etc. So what I'm saying is this was a process. It was one box at a time. It was making decisions. It was dealing with the grief that came up. It was a process. And so after I did the initial, saving money by closing out all the storage lockers and those fees I was paying, and then I brought all that stuff into my home, into that one large room that I had, and I started to sort and reorganize and rebox those things, I was then realizing that I needed a system better than what just stuff stacked up on one another. So I bought some storage shelves, on heavy duty storage shelves on rolling wheels, so that I could roll the carts around and, okay, now I'm going to deal with the tools for the van build. All those things are going to go on this rack. I still need to go through all of these boxes that are behind this rolling cart, so the rolling cart could move out of the way so I could get to the things behind it. And then again, sort those things, make decisions on those things. Am I going to keep this? Am I going to sell this? Am I going to, donate this? And during this process of dealing with the grief of my fiance, and just to be clear, I really, really love this man. He was such an inspiring person. He really was super talented. He made me laugh. I thought that I had, met my match. I thought that he was the one. And in the very beginning, I really, truly, I really was under the impression that I really had a great thing. But in this sorting and organizing and going through boxes and, catching up to things that I wasn't able to catch up to when I was working full-time in my business, meaning during this period of grieving, I was not working full-time. I was really dealing with the stuff. I was dealing with my emotions. I was dealing with my grief. I was, I was in a different season. And when I would discover things in this journey of sorting and organizing, there were some very disturbing things that I found. And some of these things were, burner phones, because he was a drug addict. And then the messages of the mean things that he was saying about me and what he was trying to do to me and to my family. And, the stealing, the identity theft. All of these things were not all discovered all at once. It was discovered over a period of time while I was decluttering and sorting through all these boxes. And then I would find another article or another thing that would be proof and evidence that this guy did not have his head on straight, and he had evil and wicked intentions for me and my family, and he was not really a good guy. And so, meaning under the influence. And, this whole idea of how could a person do this to me? And it changed my whole idea of, what love is, what is unrequited love, what is narcissistic abuse, and that whole period of finding all of these things in the process of organizing, decluttering, making decisions, sorting through boxes. I discovered that he was not who I really thought he was. And that was definitely what I would call complicated grief, complicated trauma. And, I went to therapy. I did a lot of life coaching with other great coaches, and I really learned a lot about, moving forward, letting go of what I perceived, what was, and then what really is, and what was truth and what was false. Okay. And so through this whole process of understanding that my fiance was actually, a narcissist, that he actually was a drug addict in active addiction for the majority of our relationship that I didn't even know, because I was so busy with living my life that I didn't see the signs, and he hid all of these things so strategically that it made it almost impossible to even know what was really going on with his, stories and layers of fabrication. But when you start to find the evidence and the proof, and his own journals with what he wrote down, and, his own handwriting, the things that he did to my computer, the things that he did to take my, entire internet system and, private network and tap into that remotely to steal all of my information so that he could access my, banking and all this stuff. It then explained why I had to keep ordering credit cards and bank cards. It explained the whole story of what was going on underneath of everything. So I share some of that story to explain to you that if you yourself have been involved in a relationship with a family member or a friend that has complicated, issues, whether they are a drug addict or an alcoholic or a narcissist or a combination of all those things, your things as they are may not really be entirely your fault. And I wanted to explain this again a little bit more detail just to illustrate my point. So I have always been a very, I'm going to say, hyper organized person. So if I was selling coffee, for example, then I would have all of the coffee in a box labeled, Organo Gold Black. And then I'd have Organo Gold Milk. And then I'd have Organo Gold, what is it called? The portable packets, whatever. I would have every box of my inventory for my business labeled, organized. I would have inside that box an inventory sheet of how many boxes were there, the receipt, a copy of the receipt, and what I had purchased, and when my next order date was. So what I'm saying is, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, I would have been an organized person to put all those things in the box and then know where it is. So then I would have that inventory, right? And I would walk from my kitchen into the inventory space, and I would get out a box of the black organic coffee. I would take on the list and write out minus this one, so that I'd have a running total of how many boxes of inventory of the black organic coffee that I had. And then I would take that and put that into my kitchen, and I would know that I took that out of the inventory. Okay. And so what I'm getting at is, I knew what I had and I was organized about it. But when you're living with someone who's an addict and you're living with someone who is a narcissist, they're going to lie to you. They're going to manipulate you. They were going to steal from you. They were going to cover up what they did with more lies. And that is the nature of someone who is a liar, someone who is wicked, someone who is a manipulator, someone who is a narcissist. They are going to do everything to confuse you, to tell you that things are a certain way when they aren't. And if you're listening to their words, and because they've already created a belief system within you for you to believe them from their prior behavior, which showed their, quote, integrity. And then all of a sudden you've built up this false belief in their, quote, trust. And so then you're like, oh, babe, could you go get me another, box of the black organic coffee? Could you go out to the, shed and get that for me? That would really be great. And he goes and gets it, and he brings it in, and, and I'm like, okay. And you labeled, you took it off the box so we know how much. Yeah, I did it. And so I'm thinking, I gave a task to someone that I'm creating my life with. Why would they be doing something to harm me? But in reality, he did not put down on the list what the inventory was. He was taking that entire inventory and using it for himself or selling it. And so there really wasn't that inventory that I thought that I had. And so later on, when he died, and I'm going through the inventory and I'm going through the boxes, and I'm discovering that, 3 boxes of expensive gourmet coffee that was part of a business is completely missing. Okay. And I know that I didn't drink that amount of coffee because I'm very balanced in how much coffee I drink. And I'm like, where did it go? But this was just one example of how my stuff became missing. So I had made investments in certain products and things that I was selling, and I had a certain amount that was for, quote, the family, the household, and then a certain amount that was for the business, and I had all the boxes labeled accordingly. But then when I'm now going through all those boxes after he died, and I'm discovering that he stole my supply, or he sold my supply and took the money from my supply, and that the supply that I really thought that I had wasn't really there. And so the box that was labeled Organo Gold Black Coffee was actually filled with piles of crap, like stuff that was non-useful crap that he just shoved in that box. So what I'm saying is, when you start to realize that you had your life organized in such a way, you trusted someone to be your life partner, that person manipulated you, lied to you, stole from you, and now you're dealing with all these boxes that are labeled a certain way, and then inside the boxes are not even the things that you've already taken all this time to organize and sort, and so you're left with this incredible mess of going through crap that you don't even know what it is. So as you can imagine, dealing with the death of my fiance and his craziness truly took me to a level of complicated grief that I would not wish on my worst enemy. So after that, I went through all those boxes and I dealt with all of that stuff, and my space was cleared to the point that what I had remaining was all of my content, all of my business projects, all of my fitness equipment, all the things that I needed to do to live and run my life. Okay. And so that meant that all of my yoga and Pilates and exercise equipment, all of my coaching materials from all the years and the content that I created, the books that I was writing, all of these things were in all of these boxes. And again, all of these boxes were labeled accordingly, in a certain way, in a certain area of my space. And I was functioning properly, meaning I did not have the distractions of my fiance because he had died. I did not have the distractions of, the store's lockers or managing stuff that wasn't even mine. I finally got to the point where what was in my possession, which was in my management and my stewardship, were things that were mine. And at that point, I decided that I was going to continue with the van build, and that I was going to take on the responsibilities of learning how to use these tools, hiring different people to help me along the way, and to deal with all the supplies and the inventory that had built up from the van build. So when I started to work on the van build, again, I went through all the boxes, and this is the electric, this is the plumbing, this is the, organizational stuff, this is the kitchen stuff, this is the camping stuff. And I had all those things, and then I had to then look at the current, van layout of the van, and then I had to decide, okay, is this really what I want? Is this really functioning well for me? I don't have my fiance in my life anymore. I don't need all of these things that were in the van for his use and for his purposes, because he's no longer living. So I then removed those things out of the van, and I sold some of those things. And then I started to create a new vision of what I wanted at that time. So those supplies that I had, the tools that I had, then I used to then create that next van version of what I wanted to experience in the van, how I wanted to travel. And so I was balancing my time between continuing to organize the apartment from all of this stuff and sorting through, writing content, writing my book, and, dealing with physical stuff, selling that stuff on Facebook Marketplace, and then getting time away in my van to go travel to local places, not too far away, because like I said, my main work was dealing with the stuff and creating content. And so I ended up, again, determining that that particular van layout wasn't exactly what I wanted, and that I wanted to modify it, but not necessarily because I really wanted to, but because some systems failed. So what I learned in the whole RV camping realm is I learned some hard lessons because of not managing water properly. And so we had a cold streak, and things froze, and the water containers burst, and the pipes that were in those containers burst. And all of a sudden, I had a huge expense on my hands, and I had to remove everything in the van, all the way down to lifting up the floors, taking out my entire electrical system, and putting down new floors because of the flood and the mold and the wood that had molded because something burst during the freezing time of the winter, and I had to wait until the weather was warmer for me to fix that problem. So what I'm getting at is sometimes we go through trials that, again, they really build our character. And because all those changes had to be made, I then again looked at that particular design that it was, and I said, I liked certain variables about this design, but I'm going to make it a little bit better, and I still want to keep the Murphy bed, but I want to change this and that, and I want to pull this piece of furniture out and put this one in. And so again, I did a different version after the new floors were put down, after, all of the old mold and all that stuff was taken out, and new fresh wood was put in, and all of those variables, again, showed me, be very mindful of how you manage your water, especially in the winter months. So right after I had this flood in my van, and I just invested all this money to repair, remove all the stuff, repair and put in new floors, new hardwood floors, a new Murphy bed, a new design. And I was preparing myself for a different season, and I was on my way to literally go to school in person in Virginia Beach. And so my van I was putting the last minute touches on my van, and then I was preparing all my bags that I packed for school. And so it was like the last day of last minute tweaks on the van build before I started packing all of my bags, which I'd already pre-packed inside the apartment. And so that day I was unlocking the door to the apartment, and I was wearing flip-flops, and when my feet got to the floor, like the lower floor of the apartment where I'm sitting, right now on this level, my feet touched water, and I knew there was something wrong. And I knew that my dad, had instilled in me, safety first, safety first, safety first. So as soon as I noticed the water, like, I immediately went into my upper room where I stored a bunch of linens and, comforters, blankets, towels, whatever. And I used those items to roll those items and step on those items until I could safely get to the electric box, which was in a different corner of the apartment.